Parkview Towers MCI after the flames. What does it look like now? Kind of review the response that happened. And thankfully today we have Joe Rose, the Director of Operations for AmeriPro EMS with us. We also had Tim scheduled to join us, but he had a conflict arise. So unfortunately, the Deputy Chief for New Albany Fire Department will not be here. However, we're so thankful to have Joe here to go over it with us, and he's put together this wonderful presentation. We will go through it and ask questions and have a discussion and see what did this MCI look like, how did they respond, and what were the lessons learned. Joe, go ahead.
All right. Well, thanks, Kendall. I appreciate you having me today. So as you said, we're going to do just that. So we'll jump right in, kind of cover an overview of the incident itself, the resources that we deployed out to that scene, what we learned, and what went really well. So starting off, looking at the incident itself, this was on March 22nd, 2025, just after 5 p.m. And the weather conditions at that time were partly cloudy. We initially, it was around 60 degrees and then fell into the mid 40s as the scene progressed into the evening. So again, started that evening with a caller who called 911 into the City of New Albany's dispatch center. Advised that it smelled like there was a smell of burning plastic from their apartment, that the smoke alarm was going off. So not a call that is that atypical for us to see in that area, right? Especially in any type of high rise or apartment building. These sort of things happen pretty frequently, and so we follow what our standard practice would be. The fire department was dispatched out. One of our ambulances were dispatched as well, as is routine to stand by while the fire department investigates. And initially, everything sounded very run of the mill or very ordinary. In fact, I was listening from home and listened right up to the point that I heard the battalion chief go on scene and advised that there was nothing showing. So that was kind of the last that I had heard for a few moments. And in fact, I actually stopped listening to the radio after I heard that, only to receive, the phone call a few minutes later that the scene had escalated to much more than that.
So did the escalation come from the EMS unit that arrived or the fire department? Was it pretty immediate once they got on scene, they realized that they needed more units, or was it a gradual kind of discovery?
No, it escalated pretty quickly. So there really initially was nothing showing from the outside of the structure. However, as the initial crews from the fire department accessed the building and began searching, they were quickly met with heavy fire and smoke.
Okay.
So, but it did obviously escalate from there, and so in addition to the fire department finding the smoke and the fire, we begin having multiple patients exit the building, and quickly became inundated with numerous patients coming out. Thankfully, all pretty not severe injuries, smoke inhalation, minor burns. But our initial crew on scene realized this was becoming a much bigger incident than your run of the mill smoke alarm call.
Okay.
So from there, they radioed for additional assistance. We had another ambulance that responded over to the scene, as well as one of the supervisors who thankfully lives not too far from this scene. So they kind of all arrive and begin taking it in and seeing exactly what's going on. And then again, they even realized this was bigger than just those two ambulances handling. The supervisor notified myself, and we continued dispatching ambulances there for the next while. So all in all, I believe we dispatched somewhere around 12 ambulances.
Okay.
I think we had about 5 supervisors on scene. So it grew to be a fairly large incident from both the fire department side and the EMS side.
And how many ambulances do you all keep staffed at one time?
So in New Albany, we have 3 ambulances during the day and then 2 at night.
Okay.
And then in the Louisville area, we typically have anywhere from 8 to 10 on duty at a time.
So we were pulling pretty heavily from the Louisville area to come and support your local crews.
Right,
Okay.
right. Um, so kind of looking at the scene itself, there were, a couple things that um, made it challenging. So one was just kind of the layout, right? So you can see here that this is where the fire was taking place, and you have this road that leads out um, to where we ultimately set up staging of ambulances here. And we really had to set up staging away from the building itself because this road was so narrow. Had we parked emergency vehicles along this roadway, we wouldn't have been able to get anyone in or out. So that was a good item that was identified very early by the initial set of leadership on scene was to stage the apparatus out here um, away from the scene so that we didn't prohibit people from getting in and out as they should.
That's an excellent call. I mean, not something I typically probably would have thought of ahead of time. So,
Right.
like you said, really good call by the initial management on scene to realize that this was just not going to be proactive or productive, and
Absolutely.
it would have just really caused a huge issue in trying to do anything.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it was a great decision. So this kind of shows where we had set up EMS staging. So you can see multiple ambulances lining the street here, and this is that roadway that I was talking about. So I mean, you can even see here from this photo, it's a pretty narrow road that if you were to have multiple ambulances parked along this road, it would be really challenging to get through.
Now, was this road blocked off by fire or anything so that there was no concern about crossing this intersection?
There were law enforcement in the area that were
Okay.
helping to control the scene, which is pretty standard. So that did help tremendously to ensure that we kind of kept out the people who needed to be kept out at that moment. So yes, that did help tremendously.
Okay.
And then looking at the scene a little bit deeper. So again, the building that where the fire was is here. Our command post was established just outside of the building, and as we expanded the incident, we realized we needed to go ahead and set up a triage point for all
Okay.
patients. And it's a little difficult to see from this photo. However, right where this X is, there is about 6 to 8 parking spots that were thankfully unoccupied at the time. So we pretty much took that entire space to use to triage and treat patients.
Okay.
Um, this again shows the path that we were using to get in and out. We used this end of the road to stage some additional emergency vehicles, such as emergency management, the Red Cross, um, police, other responders that were arriving. Again, here was our staging area, and then the closest hospital being Baptist Health Floyd, just right around the corner. And then again, just for some additional context, this kind of shows an aerial shot of the scene as well. So, again, this is the building in question. The command post was right about here. We're using this area right here to triage and treat patients. You can see we've got multiple fire apparatus, kind of along this roadway and
Mhm.
back here, leaving this path to get in and out. And then this is the staging area that we showed in the other
Okay.
photo. So we'll next I kind of have I have the audio of the initial dispatch, which
Okay.
I'd like to share. So we'll hit play on that next.
Florida District 4, EMS respond to 125 Fisher Drive, Parkview Towers, 125 Fisher Drive, Parkview Towers, apartment 716. Someone stated his smoke alarm was going off and there was smoke coming out of the vent. We have fire en route. Stand by for them. Cross Street through the Ernie at 1915.
So again, pretty run of the mill, right? Nothing, we didn't get reports that there was heavy smoke showing or flames showing or anything like that. So, I think it's just important to highlight that and understand how things can quickly escalate from what we think they're going to be, and why it is so important to remain vigilant and avoid complacency. Um,
And, and hearing something like that, it makes you almost seem like someone was cooking and the smoke, alarm went off. It doesn't really
right,
seem as like, oh, there might actually be a fire. Or a
right,
situation where we're
absolutely,
going to have to evacuate. And so I can imagine from a first responder standpoint of you were at home, you turned your radio down, you stopped listening, it wasn't necessary anymore. And I can imagine even those of us that would be at the station going, oh, well, it's just a smoke alarm. They'll go out there and then come right back.
right, absolutely, and 90, probably 8 to 99% of the time, that's exactly what it is,
Mhm.
right? It's the 1 or 2% that'll surprise you every now and again. Um, so we talked a little bit about how our initial units that responded into the scene, and one of the supervisors that arrived kind of as the first leadership person on the scene. um, and so during a scene where we know we're going to have numerous units responding in, and this is quickly escalating to something more serious than your just typical EMS call, we start establishing an incident command structure. And for this incident, it started kind of simple, and then quickly expanded to bring in multiple members of leadership. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about next. Is you know again, we started off with essentially one person in a command role, and then two ambulances there. As we continued to have more patients, and we continued dispatching more ambulances, we also dispatched numerous members of our leadership team, notifying everyone from the top down, basically, of what was going on, and that they were going to be needed in some capacity. So this included everyone from our medical director, to supervisors from other areas. We even had our supervisor from Henry County, Kentucky, that thankfully lives near New Albany. So with it being a weekend, he was at home and was able to respond and give us a hand. So it ultimately helped us out quite a bit, so that we had the right support for the scene and for everyone there caring for our patients. But so this is kind of the incident command structure that we evolved into. So under the operations section, which was led by Danny Jacobs, we split into triage, treatment, staging, and those folks are doing just that, right? So Alex Weber was overseeing the triage of every patient that comes out, and ensuring that they did receive a triage tag and that they appeared to be triaged appropriately, and keeping those patients organized so that we always knew, which patient needs to go next, which patient is most critical, which patient can afford, from a clinical perspective, to wait for transport. And then next we had Jordan Bullard, who was leading treatment,
Okay.
and everything from evaluating burn injuries to supplying oxygen to patients. She was managing it all, which was, she did a phenomenal job of managing multiple patients in a tight area. And then as well, we had Dana Thomas kind of managing the staging area.
Okay.
And everyone did a phenomenal job, and it worked it worked very smoothly to have the right people in the right roles coordinating different aspects of this incident. And it was very simple when when Alex triaged someone, they went into the right category, and then Jordan assumed making sure that they got the right treatment. And then when she was ready for someone to be transported, she notified Dana. Dana would send one ambulance in, to get the patients loaded up and then back out. And so, you know, that sector worked flawlessly in ensuring that patients received prompt care and getting them transported quickly. Um, After that, we had Tammy Hall, who was leading EMS logistics. And she was kind of handling everything from, do we have enough ambulances headed to the scene? Do we have enough personnel? Do we need to call people in? Do we have enough supplies? Even a bit of, how many more patients can the hospital take, right?
Mm.
Brennan Bentley kind of ran communications from our dispatch center. So, we had two dispatchers as well as Brennan kind of manning the radio, making sure that, no radio traffic was missed, that everything was getting handled appropriately. And then Jennifer Ernspiker, who we kind of had her lead peer support operations. And, this was something I felt was really necessary. These scenes can be very stressful, especially if you've not dealt with them before.
Hmm.
And even if you have, right? And so Jennifer has been doing this for, she'll probably get upset if I start telling you how long she's been in EMS, but I'll just say she's done this for a long time, right? And so, and she, she kind of has a motherly disposition about her. So, I feel like that was the perfect role for her to be in, just to, you know, walk up to a crew and say, are you good? Do you have what you need? Is there anything I can do for you? And I think that was really important. And I'm glad that that was a role that we decided to put her in that moment, just to make sure that, all of our people were supported as they navigated, this incident. Um, so this was kind of the structure that we landed with,
Hmm.
as it developed. And I think this really supported the incident really well. Um, and I think that's the thing that is important to note is you may start with something simple as we did, and then, you expand this to meet the needs of the incident. So, we could have expanded it even further had we had, other needs that arise, but, thankfully this covered what we had going on at the moment.
And it does look, I mean, the previous picture was three and it's expanded significantly from there. But I think that that is clearly it met the needs and it worked well because you've talked about, the highlights of all the different parts that went well. And honestly, I'm really glad to hear that you had an EMS peer support person. I
Right.
feel like sometimes we get so focused on the incident and what's happening, we forget the stress that it's putting on everybody around you. The crews that are sitting in their ambulance that are waiting to be called up to transport patient are still just sitting there wondering about the people they care about
Right.
the crew that went in front of them. Are these patients they know if they live in the area or,
Right.
transport often? And so that's not something you always see when you're doing these debriefs. That's not something that's always added, but I think that's very unique and an excellent thing that you guys did add. Now,
Absolutely.
Joe, would you be willing to talk a little bit about that transition from, Daniel Jacobs having the instant command role and you showing up on scene and what that transition looked like from you taking over from what he was previously doing?
Absolutely. So he and I had been in touch, from the minute he recognized that this was going to become a pretty large incident, up until I arrived. So, he was kind of keeping me posted as to what was going on my way in. And then once I arrived, I just simply radioed to him and said, meet me at this location for a face to face.
Okay.
I didn't want to do it over the radio. I didn't want to do it over the phone. I wanted to, I wanted us to actually stand face to face and hand over that responsibility, but also, kind of in the same respect, like Danny's been doing this a lot longer than I have, right? And he is a tenured paramedic, and tenured leader in EMS. So, I'm also relying on him,
Hmm.
um, for him to tell me, do you agree with this decision, and do you think this is how we should structure things? So, we met briefly, on the front of the building, um, and this was what we came up with between the two of us, is that, he said he would go run operations, and kind of oversee that sector. And then we would start moving people into these other roles. Um, and again, it worked well. So in a incident command structure, your incident commander and your operations section chief always work extremely close together.
Mhm.
So that's with he and I, that's really no different than any other day. So I think that helps a lot too. Is we already work very closely with one another, and I think that showed on this scene as well. Um, there were multiple times that an idea would pop in my head and say, well, I need to have Danny do that, and before I could say anything, he was already doing it. So I think that's just a testament to his experience, and then also how well we work with one another.
And that's what you want on these scenes. You want someone who's thinking the same way you are. So it's excellent that you all had that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so we talked a little bit about the start of the scene, and getting dispatched and the incident command structure. Um, but there's a lot of things that have to happen kind of in that initial 15, maybe 20 minutes, um,
Hmm.
to ensure the success of the incident. And a lot of people will tell you the first 15 minutes will make or break the incident. And I think the actions we took very early on have a lot to do with why it was so successful. But I started thinking about just some of the things that we've got to do when something like this happens. Getting ensuring that we're dispatching multiple resources to the area, notifying mutual aid partners, right? Because the reality is when you have 20 to 25 patients, um, you know, typically no single ambulance service has enough ambulances to transport all of them, right? And so you call on your mutual aid partners to send assistance as well. And we were extremely grateful. Both Highlander Fire and Lynx Ambulance Service did send resources to the scene to help us, which was much appreciated. We work very closely with Highlander. They've been a great partner. But everything from notifying them to see what they can do to help, to setting up staging, triage, treatment,
Hmm.
um, notifying the hospitals, right? Because if we just show up at Floyd with 20 plus patients, now all we've done is relocated the emergency to their ER, right? And so notifying area hospitals and obtaining their bed availability. Um,
Hmm.
and I'll brag on our dispatch for a moment, because that was one of the first things that I heard Danny instruct them to do over the radio is radio notify area hospitals and see how many beds they have available. And I don't know how they did it so quickly, because it seemed like no sooner than he had asked them, they replied back with answers. But they very quickly had called all the major hospitals, Floyd, Clark, U of L, Jewish, Norton, Children's, and they were able to tell us exactly how many patients each hospital could take. And so that really lets us start getting a game plan together, because again, we don't want to relocate the emergency, and we don't want to overwhelm a single hospital if we don't have to. Um, you know, Everything from notifying those hospitals to tracking of patients, right? We've got to know where everyone went so that we can follow up and um, have accountability for everyone. So
Hmm.
there's a lot of things to do, and not a whole lot of time to do them. So these are all things to keep on the forefront as you face incidents like this.
Hmm.
And without getting too deep in the weeds, I wanted to kind of end this by talking about what went really well, and then what did we learn, right? Because I think that's really important. And anytime I debrief with a crew after an incident, I always like to start with what went really well. And so, I think the first thing that I think of is just the excellent teamwork between all of the different agencies that were there. I mean, I, I hope I'm not missing anyone, but I very well may be, just because there were so many different agencies and everyone just showed up to help, right? It
Mhm.
wasn't, there weren't any egos or, power struggles or anything like that. Everyone showed up to handle their little area that they could help with. And then, when you put all that together, it makes everything run very efficiently. Um, we have an excellent working relationship with the New Albany Fire Department. We do monthly education and training with them. And I think that shows when we have these incidents.
Mhm.
Anytime there is something serious that happens in the city of New Albany, we are separate departments technically. We know we're separate agencies, but um, I think a lot of the times you wouldn't know it. You would think that we were all under the same department because we do work so well together. Again, Highlander Fire, Links Ambulance Service. We had both Floyd and Clark County Emergency Management there. The law enforcement, the people at Baptist Health Floyd. I cannot brag on them enough. Baptist Health Floyd is already a super busy hospital, and then we brought them probably 15 more patients on top of an already busy ER. Um, and my hats off to them because they never missed a beat. They quickly got patients off our stretchers onto beds to get our crews back out the door to get back to the scene. Um, and it was very impressive. Some of the other things, we saw that a unified command was established very early on, and I think again that is an important decision that really helped things run very smoothly. So, you had leadership from fire, EMS, emergency management, law enforcement, kind of right there. So, it made it really easy when, Chief Cron had something EMS related reported to him. He didn't have to look for me, he didn't have to radio to me. He literally could turn to the side and say, "Hey, they're bringing a patient down this stairwell or that stairwell." And then that's all he had to do. And then I was able to handle it from there. Right. And so having that unified command established very early and having all the right people, right there shoulder to shoulder, I think made a huge, huge difference. Um, and I say those things, the partnership and having all the people there, because statistically speaking, lives should have been lost in this
Mhm.
incident, right? We had a high rise fire with heavy fire, heavy smoke, very intense fire. I mean, enough damage that it condemns the building. And when you look at that, and I'm not an expert in the fire world. In fact, I stay away from it. I always joke that I'll stand outside and check their vitals when they come out, but beyond that, I don't go into burning buildings. But when you look at the damage and how bad the fire was, you would think surely there was at least one fatality, right? And I think the fact that we can look back on that incident and say no lives were lost um, is incredible because
Mhm.
again there probably should have been. But I think it's a testament to how quickly the fire department got into the building, stopped, put the fire out, rescued people, got them out, how quickly EMS crews were caring for patients and the incredible care they were providing. I mean, it's amazing to think about. You have a group of EMTs and paramedics in a dark parking lot on the ground taking care of anywhere from 8 to 10 patients at a time. And I think that's incredible to think about, right?
Mhm.
But again, statistically, there should have been at least one fatality, and there was not. And I, I think that's why there wasn't. The fire department did a great job of getting people rescued, and our EMS crews did a phenomenal job of caring for them and getting them the care that they needed at the hospital. Um, we had two patients that were critical. However, both made, a full recovery, which again, I think is due to how quickly the fire department got them out of the building, and how quickly we got them stabilized and into a higher level of care at the hospital.
It really does sound like so many things went right. So many things went well. And it is so important sometimes when fire departments and EMS crews don't work, to have that close working relationship like you do. You end up with incident command for fire across the parking lot while incident command for EMS is by the front door. And then they're not talking. And the whole point of having incident command is to have all of those leaders in the same place so they can do exactly what you said happened in this scenario, where Tim could turn to his right and look at you, and you could take it over from there or pass it on to the next person. And that
Right.
is exactly how this whole model is designed to be.
Mhm.
That's the point behind this.
Right.
And you're right. When I was reading about this and I heard about it, it's phenomenal to me that nobody is dead. Um, Honestly, it's phenomenal to me too that there was only 25 injured, which 25 is a huge number. But
Right.
when you think about a high-rise apartment building, it could have been so many more. And so the fact
Absolutely.
that fire was able to evacuate people so quickly and you guys were able to triage and treat right there, get them down the street, saved lives very clearly. And that's phenomenal to me because I fully expected when I heard about this that there was going to be at least one, if not two fatalities. And to hear
Right.
that there's zero is amazing. So
Right.
that really
Absolutely.
just speaks to the work you all do.
Absolutely. So, in addition to talking about what went well, I think, we would be foolish to go through any scene and not recognize that there's things that we learn from it. Because never, nothing ever goes completely as planned. But, these were things that we learned after the fact. But I think first and foremost that we learned, the public safety agencies serving the community in that area are prepared to handle a large scale emergency. I think I think we demonstrated that. Um, but we did find that while we did communicate with our hospital partners, we think we can do a better job of that, right? And so, we have and we'll continue to have ongoing meetings with them to brainstorm. How do we best notify all of these hospitals when there's something big going on, and not just notifying, but how do we keep them updated, right? And I'll own that. In the moment we did a great job of notifying them. We did a not so great job of keeping them updated as to how many more patients were left, how many more patients they could expect. So, and in full transparency, that's something that I'll own. And so that's something in our follow up meetings with particularly Baptist Health Floyd that we identified as something that we can do better the next time around, right? Um, Thankfully, on this scene, given the time of day, we had adequate resources. We had multiple ambulances to pull from Louisville to come over and assist, but we kind of asked ourselves, what if we didn't, right? What if we didn't have 8 to 10 ambulances on that day to pull over? What would we have done? And what is the most efficient way to recall personnel if we need to call them in and respond to the scene. And so, we've had some practices internally that we've put into place to say, if this happens, here is how we're going to notify, the masses to say, hey, respond here, get on an ambulance, and we're going to tell you where to go from there, right?
Mhm.
Um, and communication, right? So, um, in a lot of incidents, communication is the first thing to go. I am happy and proud to report that it did not in this incident, but I always like to come back to it and think about it. And in this situation, we operated off of our primary EMS channel for the entire incident. And thankfully, I guess the EMS gods were looking out for us and they said, you've got enough going on here. We're not going to add to it. But thankfully, from the time the incident ramped up until close to 2 hours after it was over, we did not get a single 911 call in the city of New Albany for EMS, that was not related to this fire incident.
Wow.
So thankfully, we didn't have to juggle multiple emergencies, right? We were really able to kind of focus in on this one, and we didn't have to divert any crews or any of our attention elsewhere. But this was something that we identified. The following Monday was, we used the primary EMS channel for the whole incident. What would we have done had things gotten busy elsewhere? If multiple people called 911, elsewhere in the city. And so, it really just led to a follow up conversation with emergency management to say, hey, what makes the most sense? Maybe this other channel that really doesn't get used as often should be, a backup channel. And that's ultimately what we decided. And so now, we kind of have that internal practice to say, well, we know if we get inundated and we need to, we've got this other backup channel that we can operate on. So these were kind of the key takeaways from our end. I'm sure there were probably other things that could have went a little smoother, or other things that we learned, but these were kind of the key points that I took away from the incident.
And I think they're all really good points. And I mean, it is a good thing to remember that we have to close the loop with communication. We have to tell the hospitals we're done bringing people to them. We have to tell, um,
Absolutely.
we have to kind of send our resources back to Louisville. And what does that look like? Now, listening to you talk out of curiosity, was there any supplies like oxygen tanks? I'm trying to think of other things that as they were coming out and treating patients, they were like, oh, we wish we had more of this, or we wish we had remembered to keep this.
Yeah. So thankfully, we didn't get into a bind. And however, it did get a little hairy for a minute, right? Because as you can expect, a lot of smoke inhalation
Mhm.
injuries. So you're going to be using a lot of oxygen. Um, and, on a portable oxygen tank at a high flow, you're going to burn through them pretty quickly.
Mhm.
I don't recall how many tanks we emptied, but it was a lot. I do remember that. Now, thankfully, we did have additional oxygen that was kind of being shuffled over from our headquarters in Louisville. However, Clark County Emergency Management also brought their disaster trailer, which has oxygen on board as well.
Okay.
So, and that arrived pretty early into the scene. So, we knew that we were going to be okay, especially once that arrived, thankfully.
Um, on the debrief side of the house, has there been like follow up with the crews? Like, have you debriefed with your crews that were on scene to, hey, make sure that they're, we're a month out or a couple weeks out, whenever, just to make sure that they're still doing okay, and see if they had any thoughts on, I think sometimes the frontline personnel might catch something that the incident commander doesn't see or the hospital doesn't
Oh,
see. So
100%.
I,
Yeah.
I assumed you had, but out of curiosity, I was just, there's
Yeah.
such a crucial point.
Yeah. We've had, those kind of one-on-one conversations and kind of talk to everybody, especially, um, from everyone that was doing triage or treatment on
Mhm.
down to the people who just came and transported patients, um, and so it is nice to do that because they see things that I wouldn't have, or they experience things that I didn't. So it's nice to hear feedback from them and understand what they saw, what challenges they may have had, and then how we're going to fix it moving forward.
Now, do you all prepare and do um, table talk MCIs or practice MCIs? Because this went phenomenally well, exceptionally well, better than a lot of them that you hear about or read about or talk about. And so I'd be curious to know what your prep for these situations before they come around looks like.
Yeah, so we have this was something that I challenged my team with probably 2 years ago. We kind of started talking about how, unfortunately, with certain big incidents, right, acts of violence, particularly, um, it's not a matter of if, but a matter of when.
Mhm.
we experience them. And that is just the reality of the world that we're in today. And that's kind of the one, people think about active aggressors, right? Because unfortunately, they are very common in our worlds today. And so it kind of started with that because as they were happening, we felt like they were getting closer and closer to us every time they did, and kind of our core group of leadership kept saying, it's really only a matter of time before it happens here, before it
Mhm.
happens in our town or in our response district, and we're the ones that are going to be handling it. Um, and so the same supervisor that kind of handled the scene, um, Danny Jacobs, put together some great, and he will tell you that he is a preparedness and incident command structure nerd. So he put together some really excellent training, probably been close to 2 years ago, um, that teaches, how do you handle mass casualty incidents, and then even goes into some notable mass casualty incidents in history and kind of dissects them and talks about, he's got examples of radio traffic and diagrams and things like that. And we've made a big push to really have people participate in those trainings, um, just because again in today's world it's not a matter of if but when. um, and we've had a large number of our team members who have been through that training, sometimes even more than once. And I think that you know that came in handy this evening.
It seems like it did because I keep saying it, but it sounds like everything went right. And that comes from practice, 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 prepare. Like you said, it's no longer a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And it may not be the exact situation you plan for, but a mass casualty, no matter the situation or what causes it, needs to be treated the same. You still have to set
Right.
up your instant command. You have to plan your flow of traffic and communication. All of that went so well here. And one last question for you before we hop off here. From a layperson standpoint, I'm live in New Albany. I don't know anything about EMS, and obviously, when these things happen, we feel bad. We want to reach out. We want to help. In the moment when all this is happening, what can they do to help? And following, what can they do to help? Is there anything?
Right. So I would say, first and foremost, while it is occurring, um, stay out of the area. Stay out. Let responders do the work that they're trained to do. Let them handle the scene and process the scene and worry about putting out the fire and taking care of patients. And don't add to that chaos, right? Don't congest roadways with vehicles and things of that nature. And also just for the privacy of the people who are going through this, right? um, I can't imagine, they would feel great about suffering from smoke inhalation and looking up and seeing someone recording it with their phone, right? Like this is a terrible situation, and we shouldn't want to capitalize on it. So that would be my first note of advice is, stay out of the area and let the responders do what we do best, and handle the scene and take care of people. um, but really after, and this is something that I mentioned, in a week or so following, is um, a simple thank you. You
Mhm.
know, as you see EMS, fire, police, emergency management, when you see your community's first responders out in the community, just take a moment to thank them, and say, hey, I heard that, this thing happened the other night, and I'm sure that it was probably pretty hectic. And, I want to thank you for what you do. That's not why any of us get into this job. It's a thankless job. We do it because we enjoy serving others and taking care of the community. But just to hear a simple thank you is so impactful to people. Um, and so I just remind the public of that, as when you see your responders out in the community, just take a moment to thank them for what they're doing.
Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today and to share
Absolutely.
your thoughts about this whole thing and lessons learned and what went well. And anybody who's watching or listening, there is a QR code for you to scan to get your CE hours. And we appreciate you taking the time to listen. And Joe, really thank you for taking the time to talk with me. It's a great thing to debrief, and it's really exciting when they go well. These are the ones that are fun to debrief. You're not having to dissect all the parts that went bad, because everything went really well for you all. And I'm so thankful to hear that, and thankful that the teams went well, and nobody was killed. All phenomenal things. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today, and thank you for the strong work that you're doing over there in New Albany. And we just appreciate you. So thank you.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Everybody have a good day.